Imagine a young woman who despises everything a MAGA hat represents. One fateful night, her life is saved by a stranger wearing that very hat. What follows is a journey of unexpected kindness, shattered assumptions, and a bond that proves humanity is greater than any divide. Stay with us to uncover a story that will challenge your beliefs and touch your heart. Before you speak or act against someone, think twice. The person standing calmly, speaking kindly without anger or abuse, might be far more powerful and influential than they appear. Never underestimate simplicity. Sometimes, the most unassuming people hold the greatest strength. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. The town square buzzed with life as people went about their daily routines. Vendors called out to potential customers, the smell of fresh pastries wafted through the air, and the faint sound of a busker's guitar added to the lively atmosphere. Anna navigated the crowded streets, her tote bag slung over her shoulder, her brow furrowed with a mixture of annoyance and determination. She was always on edge in these settings, the chaos of the town matching the frustration she often carried with her. Anna was in her late 20s, fiercely opinionated and deeply rooted in her beliefs. To her, the world was increasingly divided, and symbols like the red MAGA hat epitomized everything she despised. She associated it with arrogance, division, and values she couldn't understand or tolerate. Every time she saw that hat, it triggered an instinctual wave of anger, a reminder of the conflicts and frustrations she believed were tearing the country apart. As she passed a small cafe, her gaze locked onto a figure seated at one of the outdoor tables. An older man, perhaps in his 60s, sat sipping a cup of coffee and reading a newspaper. He wore a simple outfit of jeans and a plaid shirt, but it was the bright red MAGA hat on his head that immediately drew Anna's attention. Her lips tightened into a thin line, her steps faltering for a moment, her mind filled with assumptions about who this man must be, what he stood for, what he believed in, and how different he was from her. John, the man in the red hat, seemed completely at ease, oblivious to the tension radiating from Anna. He had a warm, approachable face, the kind that naturally put people at ease. He folded his newspaper neatly and took a sip of his coffee, his posture relaxed. He had lived in this town for decades, known to many as a helpful and generous neighbor. He volunteered at the local community center, fixed broken fences for elderly neighbors, and always greeted strangers with a smile. To him, the hat was a small part of who he was, a symbol of his beliefs and personal experiences, but it didn't define him. Anna, however, couldn't see past it. She felt her pulse quicken as her frustration grew. Her mind raced with thoughts about people like him, thoughts that she rarely challenged. She shifted her tote bag higher on her shoulder, deliberately avoiding his gaze as she hurried past the cafe, determined not to engage. As she walked away, she couldn't shake the image of the man in the hat. Her thoughts spiraled into judgment, assumptions piling one on top of another. She felt justified in her disdain, certain that she knew exactly who he was and what he represented. John, meanwhile, finished his coffee and rose from his seat, folding the newspaper under his arm. He noticed Anna's hurried departure and the tension in her movements, but chose not to dwell on it. He had long learned that people's reactions often had little to do with him personally. With a calm demeanor, he adjusted his hat, nodded politely to a passing stranger, and walked down the street, carrying the same quiet kindness that had always defined him. For Anna, it was just another day where her frustrations were confirmed by what she thought she saw. For John, it was just another day of trying to live by his values, unaware that his path would soon cross with hers in a way neither could have imagined. The sun was setting over the small highway that cut through the outskirts of town. Anna was driving back from a work errand, her mind still swirling with the frustrations of the day. She tapped her fingers on the steering wheel as her favorite podcast played faintly in the background. The road ahead was quiet, lined with dense trees, and the fading light made everything seem slightly surreal. As she rounded a bend, her car hit a patch of loose gravel. The vehicle skidded uncontrollably, and before she could react, it veered off the road, slamming into a tree with a sickening crunch. The force of the impact left Anna dazed, her head throbbing from where it had hit the steering wheel. Smoke began to rise from under the hood, and the acrid smell of burning oil filled the air. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the seatbelt, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She tried the door handle, but it was jammed. Anna's heart raced as she realized the smoke was growing thicker, curling into the cabin. Her vision blurred as panic took hold, and tears streamed down her cheeks. She banged weakly on the window, her voice a hoarse whisper as she called for help, knowing she was miles from the nearest house or gas station. Out on the road, John was driving home in his old pickup truck after running some errands. His MAGA hat rested comfortably on his head, and the hum of the engine was a soothing backdrop to his thoughts. As he approached the bend, he noticed the faint glimmer of headlights off the road and smoke rising through the trees. His eyes sharpened with concern, and without hesitation he pulled over, parking his truck on the shoulder. Grabbing a flashlight from the glove box, he jogged toward the wreckage. When he saw the mangled car and the smoke thickening, he broke into a sprint. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" he called, his voice steady but urgent. Inside the car, Anna heard the voice faintly, like a beacon cutting through her haze of fear. She tried to respond, but her throat felt dry, and all she could manage was a weak cough. John peered through the cracked window, spotting her slumped form in the driver's seat. "Hang tight," he shouted. "I'm getting you out." Without a second thought, John pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around his hand before smashing the window with the flashlight. Shards of glass scattered as he reached in to unlock the door. The smell of smoke was overpowering now, and John knew he had to act fast. He yanked the door open, the metal groaning in protest, and leaned inside. "Can you move?" he asked, his voice calm despite the urgency in his eyes. Anna blinked up at him, disoriented. She managed a faint nod, but her limbs felt like lead. John carefully unbuckled her seatbelt, sliding an arm under her shoulders to support her. "We've got to get out of here," he said firmly. "Can you lean on me?" With his help, Anna stumbled out of the car, her legs wobbling beneath her. The moment they were clear of the wreckage, John carried her a few more feet to safety before gently lowering her to the ground. The car's hood erupted in flames moments later, the fire crackling ominously as it consumed the vehicle. Anna coughed, her lungs burning from the smoke. She clung weakly to John's arm, her mind struggling to piece together what had happened. "You're okay now," John reassured her, his voice steady and kind. "Just breathe. The worst is over." For a moment, Anna could only sit there, her head resting against his shoulder as adrenaline coursed through her system. She was too disoriented to notice his face or the hat he wore. All she knew was that someone had saved her, someone who had risked everything to pull her from the wreckage. John stayed with her until the paramedics arrived, holding her hand and speaking in a soothing tone to keep her calm. When they finally loaded her into the ambulance, she was still too dazed to fully register her surroundings. John gave a brief statement to the first responders before quietly stepping back, watching as the ambulance's lights disappeared down the road. As he returned to his truck, John took a deep breath, his heart still racing from the ordeal. He adjusted his hat and drove off into the twilight, relieved that the woman he had rescued was safe. He didn't expect her to remember him. It wasn't why he'd helped. For John, doing the right thing was simply second nature. Anna woke slowly, her body aching and her mind clouded with fragments of memory. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the steady beeping of a heart monitor told her she was in a hospital. She blinked against the fluorescent lights, trying to piece together what had happened. The last thing she remembered was her car skidding off the road, the crash, and then a voice. Someone had been there pulling her out, but everything after that was a blur. She shifted slightly, wincing as pain radiated through her side. A nurse entered the room, offering a reassuring smile. "Good to see you awake," she said. "You've had quite the ordeal. A gentleman brought you in after pulling you from the wreck." Anna nodded faintly, her voice raspy. "Do you know who it was?" The nurse shook her head. "He stayed until the paramedics took over, but didn't leave his name. He said he'd check in on you later, though. Seemed like a very kind man." Anna closed her eyes, trying to summon the clear image of her rescuer. The memory was fuzzy, but she remembered a firm grip, a calm voice, and the sense of being cared for in her most vulnerable moment. Gratitude mixed with curiosity as she wondered who he was and why he had stopped to help. Later that afternoon, as she dozed lightly, a knock at the door roused her. She looked up, expecting to see a nurse or doctor, but froze when the door opened to reveal an older man with a red MAGA hat perched on his head. The words, "Make America Great Again," stood out starkly, sending a wave of conflicting emotions through her. "It's him!" She recognized his face now, though she hadn't registered it in the chaos of the accident. Her first instinct was disbelief, followed quickly by confusion. This was the man she had dismissed in the cafe just days earlier, the man she had judged so harshly without a second thought. And now, here he was, standing in her hospital room, the same red hat on his head. John stepped inside with a warm smile, his voice gentle as he said, "I'm glad to see you're awake. How are you feeling?" Anna's mind raced, struggling to reconcile her feelings. You're the one who saved me," she asked, her voice tinged with surprise and hesitation. John nodded, his expression kind but humble. "I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I'm glad I could help." Anna didn't know how to respond. Her instinct was to thank him, but the sight of the hat stirred the same frustration and bias she had carried with her for so long. She had been so certain she knew what kind of person wore that hat, and yet this man had risked his life for her. The contradiction left her reeling. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally, her tone uncertain. "I mean, thank you. I don't even know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," John replied, pulling a chair closer to her bed and sitting down. "I just wanted to see how you were doing. You had a rough night out there." Anna studied him, searching for something in his expression that would confirm her preconceived notions. But all she saw was genuine concern and kindness. He didn't seem interested in talking about politics or the hat that sat prominently on his head. His focus was entirely on her recovery. "What did you help me?" she asked suddenly, her voice sharper than she intended. John tilted his head, his smile softening. "Why wouldn't I?" he said simply. "You needed help and I was there. That's all there is to it." His answer disarmed her. She had expected something different, something that aligned with the assumptions she had built about people like him. But his words were straightforward, free of any agenda or expectation. "You don't even know me," she said quietly. "I didn't need to," John replied. "You were in trouble. That was enough for me." Anna looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting with the blanket. She felt a pang of guilt for how she had judged him, for the assumptions she had made without ever knowing who he was. "I'm sorry," she said softly, surprising herself. "I think I misjudged you." John chuckled lightly, his eyes crinkling with good humor. "Happens to the best of us," he said. "I'm not here to change your mind about anything. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." Anna's gaze flicked to the hat again, and she hesitated before speaking. "That hat, it means something very different to me than it does to you." John nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I imagine it does," he said, "but it's just a hat. It doesn't change who I am, just like your opinions don't change who you are. What matters is how we treat each other, don't you think?" His words settled over her like a weight, forcing her to confront the biases she had carried for so long. She didn't have an answer, but she felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. "Thank you," she said again, this time with more conviction, "for everything." John stood, adjusting his hat as he prepared to leave. "Take care of yourself, Anna," he said warmly. "You've got a lot of people rooting for you." As the door closed behind him, Anna lay back against the pillows, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The man she had despised without knowing had just taught her a lesson she hadn't expected to learn. A lesson about kindness, humanity, and the importance of looking beyond the surface. The day after John's visit, Anna found herself staring out of the hospital window, her mind swirling with conflicted thoughts. She couldn't stop replaying the moment he stepped into her room, the bright red hat perched on his head, and the way her emotions had clashed violently. Gratitude for his selflessness wrestled with the deeply ingrained bias she held toward everything that hat symbolized. Later that afternoon, the door opened again, and John walked in with the same calm demeanor. He carried a small bouquet of wild flowers and placed them on the table beside her bed. "Thought these might brighten up the place," he said with a warm smile. Anna sat up a little straighter, offering a faint smile in return. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to do that." John pulled up a chair, his movements unhurried, and settled in. "I wanted to. I wanted to. How are you feeling today?" "Better," she admitted, though her voice carried hesitation. "Physically, at least." John gave a knowing nod, sensing the weight of her unspoken thoughts. For a moment, they sat in a comfortable silence, the flowers adding a splash of color to the sterile hospital room. Finally, Anna gathered the courage to speak. "Can I ask you something?" she began, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her blanket. "Of course," John said, leaning forward slightly. It's about the hat," she said carefully, her eyes darting toward it. Why do you wear it? I mean, I don't mean to be rude, but it represents so much division to me. It's hard to understand." John didn't seem surprised by the question. He removed the hat, setting it on his lap as he considered his response. "That's fair," he said, finally. "I know it means different things to different people. For me, though, it's not about division or hate. It's about something much more personal." Anna watched him closely, her curiosity growing. "What do you mean?" she asked. John took a deep breath, his gaze softening as he began to speak. "My wife Margaret passed away a few years ago. She was the kindest, most compassionate person I ever knew. She wore a hat just like this one, not because she agreed with every policy or idea, but because she believed in the idea of hope. Hope that people could come together, that we could focus on what unites us rather than what divides us." He paused, his fingers brushing over the brim of the hat. "When she passed, I started wearing it as a way to honor her. It reminds me of her belief in the goodness of people, even when it's hard to see. It's not about politics for me. It's about her and the values she stood for: kindness, resilience, and the courage to do what's right." Anna's throat tightened as she listened. She hadn't expected such a deeply personal answer, one that challenged every assumption she had made. The hat, which she had viewed as a symbol of everything wrong with the world, now carried a meaning she hadn't considered. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said quietly. "She sounds like she was an amazing person." "She was," John said with a small smile, "and I try to live up to her example every day. That's why I stopped to help you. Margaret would never forgive me if I didn't." Anna's heart ached at his words, a mixture of guilt and admiration swirling inside her. "I judged you," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I saw the hat and I thought I knew everything about you. I thought Well, I thought you were someone you're clearly not. John shook his head gently. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. We all make assumptions. It's human nature. What matters is what we do once we realized we were wrong. Anna felt tears welling in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. I've always been so sure about what that hat represents, she said, her voice raw with emotion. I never thought about the person wearing it, about what it might mean to them. I'm sorry. John reached out, placing a reassuring hand on hers. Don't be too hard on yourself, he said. It's easy to get caught up in symbols and forget about the people behind them. What matters is that you're willing to see things differently now. Anna looked at him, her gratitude overflowing. Thank you, she said sincerely. Not just for saving my life, but for helping me see things more clearly. I needed that. John smiled, his eyes kind. We all need a little clarity now and then, he said. And who knows, maybe one day you'll do the same for someone else. As John stood to leave, Anna found herself looking at the hat differently. It was no longer just a symbol of division to her. It was a reminder of the complexity of people, of the stories and values that couldn't be captured in a single word or image. John, she called out as he reached the door. He turned, his expression curious. Your wife was right, she said with a heartfelt smile. There is goodness in people. I see it now. John nodded, tipping his hat slightly. She'd be happy to hear that, he said before stepping out into the hallway. As the door closed behind him, Anna leaned back against the pillows, her mind racing. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of hope, not just for herself, but for the world. She realized how much kindness and understanding could change perspectives, and she vowed to carry that lesson forward. In the weeks following her recovery, Anna couldn't stop thinking about her encounter with John. The man she had once dismissed without a second thought had become someone she deeply admired. His courage, kindness, and the personal story behind his MAGA hat forced her to reevaluate not only her assumptions about him, but about the world at large. Anna began to view people differently. Where she once saw symbols and affiliations, she now looked for actions and character. It wasn't an overnight change. The biases she carried were deeply ingrained, but John's example had planted a seed. She found herself questioning her own judgments more often, trying to understand the person behind the outward appearance. She decided to share her story on social media. In a heartfelt post, she described the accident, the fear she had felt, and how John had saved her life without hesitation. She spoke about her shock when she realized who he was, and the internal struggle she faced as she tried to reconcile his actions with her assumptions about him. I judged him for his hat, she wrote, but he taught me that people are so much more than the symbols they wear. He didn't see me as someone who disagreed with him. He just saw someone who needed help. And that's what matters. Kindness and humanity are what bring us together, not the labels we put on each other. The post quickly gained traction, with friends and even strangers commenting on how powerful her story was. Some shared their own experiences of unexpected kindness from unlikely sources, while others admitted that her story had made them think differently about their own biases. Anna and John's friendship grew as they kept in touch. John would visit her at the cafe where she often worked, and their conversations became a source of comfort and inspiration for both of them. They talked about everything from books to community events, rarely touching on politics, but always finding common ground in their shared values. "I never thought I'd have a friend like you," Anna admitted one day as they sat on a park bench. "But I'm glad I do." John smiled, tipping his hat. "Me too, Anna. You remind me of my wife in some ways, strong-willed, determined, and always willing to grow." Their bond became a testament to the idea that ideological differences didn't have to divide people. Through mutual respect and understanding, they had built something that transcended politics and labels. Anna often thought about how much she had learned from John, and how his kindness had not only saved her life, but changed it in ways she hadn't thought possible. As she reflected on her journey, Anna realized how powerful compassion and understanding could be. The world was still divided in many ways, but she now believed that those divides could be bridged, one act of kindness at a time. She began volunteering at local community events, inspired by John's dedication to helping others, and used her platform to encourage conversations about empathy and unity. One evening, as the sun set over the park where they often met, Anna turned to John and said, "You know, you've taught me something I'll never forget." "What's that?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. "That people are more alike than they are different," she said. "We just have to be willing to see it." John nodded thoughtfully. "And once we do, we can do a lot of good in the world." Anna smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. For the first time in years, she felt hopeful not just for herself, but for everyone. She had learned that kindness was a universal language, and that understanding could dissolve even the deepest divides. It was a lesson she carried with her every day, determined to pass it on to anyone willing to listen. The story emphasizes the transformative power of empathy and understanding, showing how looking beyond symbols allows us to see humanity in others. It demonstrates that acts of kindness have the strength to dissolve long-held biases, fostering unexpected connections that bridge divides. Through John and Anna's journey, the narrative reveals that shared humanity is far greater than political or ideological differences, proving that unity is achievable when we focus on what truly matters. The ripple effect of one courageous and compassionate act is profound, inspiring others to embrace change and create a more understanding and connected world. Before you speak or act against someone, think twice. The person standing calmly, speaking kindly without anger or abuse, might be far more powerful and influential than they appear. Never underestimate simplicity. Sometimes, the most unassuming people hold the greatest strength. We'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this story? Share your perspective in the comments and let us know if you've ever experienced or witnessed a moment of unexpected kindness that changed your outlook. Don't hold back. Tell us your real stories. Your experience could inspire others to embrace empathy and see the world differently. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories.